Reverend Dr. Ron Fox has been a motivational speaker and workshop facilitator for over 25 years. He's also, of course, an ordained minister with Centers for Spiritual Living. He was awarded the Doctor of Divinity in 2018 by Centers for Spiritual Living and awarded also the Meritorious Minister Award for his outstanding service. He resides in Port St. John, Florida, with his wife, Becky, who we just heard from. But thank you for joining us again today, Reverend Dr. Ron Fox. We look so forward to hearing your message today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad. I love coming back here. So I know I'm going to enjoy it, and I hope you all do too. So the title, you see it up there, is How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And I want to begin with two quotes from Dr. Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of the Centers for Spiritual Living. So the first one, he said, "No limit can be placed on the spirit of man. It merges with the universal spirit, for the two are really one." And the second quote, he said, "Whatever is true of the universe as a whole must also be true of the individual as some part of this whole." And you know how I was thinking, how do I use this? And in my personal prayer work, very often when I'm praying, one of the things that I say is, I am not all of God, but God is all of me. And I also say, I am a part of this divine presence, and I can use it. And so I want to read something to you that from an article that I wrote for Science of Mind magazine. And I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. And it's titled, "You Are a Spiritual Powerhouse." Recently, I read an article describing the greatest regrets that people have on their deathbeds. The single biggest regret was not living a life that was true to themselves. They lived their life to meet other people's expectations. In the book Spiritual Maturity, Joseph Sharp writes of a patient who was dying from AIDS, telling him, "I want you to know, if I could do it all again, I would be more outrageous. You know, give him hell, be more myself." How sad. We can avoid that fate by remembering that we're here for a purpose and that the greatest, most loving power in the universe is waiting to help us live the life that we dream about. So you might ask, where do I begin? The answer is simple: wherever you are. Ernest Holmes tells us when we are unsure of where to start, we should pause and listen. We must trust that the same power that started all things will start us in the right direction. It does not matter what happened in the past. We can move beyond any disappointment, obstacle, setback, or disagreement or discouragement. One last thing. On a recent awards program, George Lucas was being honored. His friend Steven Spielberg was telling the audience George's philosophy of life. He said, "George believes, don't listen to your peers, don't listen to your parents, don't listen to your culture, only listen to yourself. That's where you'll find your truth. Our truth lies within, because that's where spirit resides." Each of us has the ability to move within and discover our still small voice, a voice of inner wisdom that will guide us to the right path to follow, no matter where we are in life. You know, we teach that God is without limits, and God is right here working for us, but we must provide the consciousness, because in order to work for us, Spirit must work through us. Joel Goldsmith is one of the wonderful New Thought writers, and he says that any issue in our life is not determined by external conditions, but by consciousness. And he asks the question, so how do we bring God into our consciousness? And he uses what I think is an interesting example. He speaks about the principles of music. And he said, look, if you don't know the principles of music, if you try to play an instrument, it's going to sound really discordant. You're not going to sound very well. But you don't blame the principles of music. What you do is you work at it, you practice until you get better and you get a better sound. And he said, God is right here, right now. But we too need to follow spiritual principles. We need to discipline ourselves in order to manifest our dreams. And when we do this, we have our own experience of God. And I just want to touch on how do we do that? How do we get our own experience of God? How do we develop that consciousness? Well, I'm sure you know all of the answers. We can pray. We can spend time in the silence. I meditate. We don't have to meditate. We can just make room for God by being silent, walking in nature, walking by the ocean, depends where you live, but just make time. We can read. We can obviously go to church. And one thing that I think doesn't get enough attention on what we can do is we can hang with people that are like-minded. We can have a community. That is so important, because if you hang with people that don't believe you, don't believe this, they're going to bring you down. Whereas if you hang with people that are part of your community and believe in the principles, when you're having a difficult time, you have people that can help you move back up. I know my own center closed about 1.5 years ago, and I'll bet a week doesn't go by when my wife, Becky, who you just heard, doesn't say to me, I really miss our community. I really do. The late Reverend Dr. Terry Cole, one of her books, she bought a piano. She had no idea how to play the piano. So what she did, she put it wherever she was going to put it in her house. And then I think it was for a week. Every day she would spend an hour in prayer that she would learn how to play the piano. After the week, she sits down at the bench with a flourish, starts to play, and it sounds terrible. It stinks, because Terry knows the principles of spirituality, but not the principles of music. And so she had to learn that. She had to get a teacher and learn the principle of music to be able to not sound discordant. And we need to learn the principles of spirituality to have spirit come into our life. The author Alan Cohen tells a story about an eagle that was living with a group of chickens. And one day, a naturalist happened to walk by the farm where this eagle was. And he was amazed. And he said to the farmer, what goes here? What's happening? And the farmer said to him, I found this eagle. Don't know what happened, whether it fell out of the nest or what. I picked it up. I nursed it back to health. And I put it with my chickens. I feed him what I feed the chickens. And he thinks he's a chicken. He can't even fly. And the naturalist says, he's an eagle. So he has the heart of an eagle. He can learn to fly. And so the farmer says, I'm willing to try. So they take the eagle and they take him up high, and they try throwing them up, doesn't work. They try it again, and it doesn't work. And while they're trying to figure out what to do, wouldn't you know, an eagle comes soaring by overhead. And our eagle looks up and sees the eagle soaring by. And this time, when the naturalist picks him up, his entire body starts to shake. And he takes off and he flies. The moral of the story is the eagle represents our true self that has unlimited power and unlimited potential. The chicken represents that part of us that operates from fear and limitation. And you know, like that eagle, a lot of us live with a case of mistaken identity. Somebody said we suffer from a case of spiritual amnesia. And it causes us to act in a far less powerful manner than we're meant to live. And you know, the spiritual path, our spiritual path, is not about changing. It's not about changing at all. It's about remembering who we are. That's why the mystic, the 12th and 13th century mystic, Meister Eckhart, said, and I'm just going to paraphrase, he said spirituality, the spiritual life, is not about adding anything. It's about subtracting. And what he meant is we are as spiritual as we are ever going to be right now. So we don't need to add anything. But as we go through our life, sometimes we collect false beliefs. You know, lots of things happen. And that's what we need to subtract to get back to the real and genuine whoever we are, to that true God within. So I want to tell you a fable about somebody named Willow. I want to make the point in a different way. So Willow lived in medieval times, and his life's desire was to be a wizard. So he would practice. I don't know what you do to practice to be a wizard, but whatever it is, that's what Willow did. Because in the village where he lived, the town wizard once a year would hold a contest to see who was going to be his apprentice for that year. And this particular year, Willow was a finalist. And at one point, the wizard held up his hand and he said, "Which finger has the power? Is it my index finger?" And they went, "No." "Is it my thumb?" "No." "Is it my ring finger?" And they all just said no and didn't add anything to it. And the wizard decided none of them were ready. And he didn't choose an apprentice that year. And so Willow went off to live his life. And he became a soldier. And when he became a soldier, he overcame a lot of his deepest fears. And he grew in wisdom and in strength. You might say Willow went from being a boy to being a man. And he went back to his village and he stopped by to speak to the wizard. And the wizard said to him, "Tell me, Willow, when I asked you the question about where the power lies in which finger, what were you thinking?" And Willow said, "What I was thinking was the power resides in my own hand." And the wizard said, "Well, why didn't you say that?" And Willow said, "I was embarrassed. It seemed like a really arrogant answer." And the wizard said, that was the right answer. And Willow said, I know that now. I realize the power resides within. And the wizard said to him, Willow, if you know that now, then you've become the master. And what it is, when we know that, what we do is we become the master of our own life. So I want to read a quote to you. This is from Anonymous, that great writer, who wrote, deep within man dwell these slumbering powers, powers that would astonish him, forces that would revolutionize his life if aroused and put into action. So what this quote is saying is we are powerful beings and we can overcome, this is how I take it, anything. So later when we have our discussion, I want to touch on this a little more about overcoming difficult situations when we realize what the power is that we have. Barbara DeAngelis wrote a book called Soul Shifts. And she says, what are they? Well, she said they're inner actions. Rather than fixing or revising things on the outside, we take inner actions. We make shifts in consciousness from within. We transform our lives from within. It's a new way of seeing our life and the world. She said, it's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing ourselves and the world differently. So let me tell you another story that will bring it home. This newlywed couple, buys a home and they move in. And the first morning they're having breakfast. And the wife says to the husband, well, I see out the window that our neighbor is hanging her clothes up on a clothesline. And the whites look kind of gray. The clothes look dull. She needs to change whatever she's using to wash them. And she needs to get a new detergent. And for the next 3 or 4 mornings in a row, they have breakfast together. And the wife again says, look at those clothes. They're just dull. They're not, she needs a new detergent. About the 5th or 6th morning, the wife comes down and goes, whoa, it's almost like she heard me, like she got a new detergent. Look at those, the whites are white. Everything is just beautiful. She must have gotten a new detergent. And her husband says, no, she didn't do anything. I got up really early today and I washed our windows. Again, making the point. It's what we do. It's what we see. The power is in here. Some of you may know Gene Houston. Gene Houston is a writer and a wonderful facilitator. And Gene Houston wrote about an exercise she likes to do to bring this point home about the real you and me. And so what she does, she gets the group, they move all the chairs away, and she has them all close their eyes and mill around. And when they're going to do that, they're going to bump into one another. And when 2 people bump into one another, one of them says to the other, are you the God in hiding? And the second one responds, are you the God in hiding? And that goes on, except for one person whom Gene has spoken to before the exercise. That person remains silent. And so when someone bumps into them, they remain silent. And from then on, that person has to remain silent. They've remained what Gene called Godded. And so as that keeps happening, you can imagine Eventually, the entire room is silent. And then Jean says, open your eyes and look around. Look at all the gods that are no longer in hiding. And she said, when that happens, a hush comes over the group. And then they start to laugh and hug one another. And she said what it is, they see the truth about one another because this game draws out what's found in every spiritual teaching. And that teaching is we all contain a God seed, a divine essence that can be nurtured through spiritual practice. We all have a God seed that can be nurtured through spiritual practice. You know, many people don't realize that they're living a limited life. That's because they've lived it for so long. It feels that's the way life is. They get to believe that they're limited, when in truth, the only limitations that we have are the ones that we put on ourselves. And children have unlimited dreams. And yet somewhere along the way, those unlimited dreams seem to die. Let me tell you about two experiments I read that are very similar. A group of psychologists went into an elementary school and they said to the second graders, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the answers like come, whatever the kid said, policeman, fireman, doctor, nurse, astronaut, whatever they said, they just come. Every class in the elementary school that they went to, that's what happened. Then they went to a high school and asked the same question and got basically nothing back in return because they don't want to look silly. Then I read Carl Sagan. He did something similar. He went into elementary schools and talked to the kids about science and then said, what questions do you have? And these kids had all kinds of questions. They didn't stop to say, oh, I'm going to look silly. This question will be silly, blah, blah, blah. They just went at it. He went into high schools, did the same thing, and got the same response that the psychologists got. Next to nothing. Passion doesn't just die. It dies from lack of use. And it always, when I think about these, it always makes me wonder, what are we doing to our children? What are we teaching them or not teaching them that makes this happen, makes them not feel they can be who they really are? Rabbi Dov Heller wrote that for all eternity, each one of us is unique. We're the only one of us that's ever going to be. And he said, imitation is death. Uniqueness is life. And he said, we must listen to our own voice, because when we follow the voice of another, we become a cheap copy. Think about that. This is a rabbi. Those are really strong words, saying when you listen to the voice of another, you become a cheap copy. He wrote, there are voices all around us telling us who we should be, but somewhere amidst those voices is our own. Unquote. When we listen to our voice, we take ownership of our life. Our voice, each of our voices, knows what's right for us. And when we listen to our voice, that's what frees us. So I want to close with, I couldn't decide which to use, so I'm going to do both. They're both from the book, I Will Not Die an Unlived Life by Donna Markova. And the first one, she says, I believe that our existence in this world, I do not believe that our existence in this world is a random accident. Maybe it is, but I don't believe it. I believe there is more to life than living each day as it comes. The great cellist Pablo Casals agreed. He said that through the whole of recorded history, there has never been another such as you. Each of us is a miracle of uniqueness. Each of us, therefore, is responsible for the discovery of our sustaining passions and rhythms, the cultivation of the green fields in which we can discover what keeps us connected to the full fertility of our soul and all it has to give the world. And the second thing I'm going to read to you, she calls it Living Wide Open, Landscapes of the Mind. And she wrote, I wrote this poem the night my father died with a shrug. His heart was hollow and vacant of dreams. He was convinced he didn't matter. And here it is. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of failing or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that each of what comes to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom, and that which comes to me as a blossom goes on as fruit. Thank you for being this opportunity, for giving me this opportunity. God bless you.